In the late 1980s, young Evan lives happily with his mother, Andrea, and his dog. One day, Andrea drops him off at school, where his teacher requests to speak with her. The teacher explains that she asked the children to draw what they wanted to be when they grew up, but Evan's drawing was alarming, a depiction of a murder. When questioned, Evan cannot recall drawing it. That evening, Andrea takes Evan to a mental institution for evaluation, worried that he may have inherited a mental illness from his father. The doctor suggests that Evan keep a daily journal to help jog his memory. The next day, Evan begins documenting his activities. While Andrea is busy, she turns around to find Evan holding a knife. He snaps out of a trance, unable to remember picking it up. Disturbed, Andrea drops Evan off at the home of his friends, siblings Kaylee and Tommy. Their father, George, a divorced man, has recently acquired a new video camera and proposes making films with the kids, swearing them to secrecy. Tensions arise when Tommy grows jealous of Evangelist. Moments later, Evan experiences another blackout, only to regain consciousness in George's basement. Both Evan and Kaylee are undressed, and George is filming them while drinking. Confused and terrified, Evan protests, but George turns menacing, threatening to call Andrea and lie about Evan misbehaving. Kaylee remains silent, seemingly paralyzed, while Tommy watches angrily, breaking a doll in his hands. Andrea consults the doctor again, but test results show nothing physically wrong with Evan. The doctor suggests Evan's memory lapses might be due to stress and potentially stem from unresolved issues about his absent father, who resides permanently in the same institution. Hoping it might help Evan, Andrea arranges for a meeting between father and son. When Evan meets his father, Jason, the doctors sedate and handcuff him for safety. Jason initially speaks kindly to Evan, but he suddenly attacks, attempting to strangle his son, while screaming that Evan must die to save him. Guards intervene and subdue Jason, but their force inadvertently kills him. At the funeral, Kaylee holds Evan's hand in consolation. 6 years later, Evan has grown closer to Kaylee, Tommy, and their friend Lenny. One day, while secretly smoking, Tommy mocks Lenny and convinces him to put a firework in a mailbox as a prank. Evan blacks out again and regains awareness as he and Tommy are dragging a traumatized Lenny away. An ambulance arrives, and Tommy lies to Andrea, claiming they were just playing when Lenny suddenly panicked. Evan, guilt-stricken, cannot remember what happened. Later at home, Evan discovers an envelope with his grandfather's death certificate, revealing he also died in a mental institution. Andrea takes Evan to the institution again, where the doctor hypnotizes him to recover Lenny's incident. Evan remembers seeing a car approach the mailbox just before the explosion, but the memory fades, leaving him in pain and with a nosebleed. The doctor wakes him up, but Evan doesn't remember what he recalled. Frustrated, Evan asks Tommy about the event, but Tommy violently warns him to never bring it up. One evening, as the group watches a movie, Kaylee leaves abruptly. Evan follows her and discovers scars on her arms from George's abuse. She confesses George blamed her for Lenny's accident. Evan comforts her, and they kiss, but Tommy catches them, grows enraged, and starts a fight. Later, Evan and Kaylee secretly visit Lenny, who now isolates himself in his room, obsessively making models. When Evan brings up the dog incident, Lenny angrily repeats Tommy's threats and shoves Evan into a shelf. Determined to understand, Evan reads his journal entry about the mailbox explosion, which transports him back to the moment. He sees a woman and her baby checking the mailbox when it explodes, leaving Lenny guilt-ridden. Evan returns to the present with a burn scar from a dropped cigarette and vomits in distress. When he calls Lenny, his mother forbids further contact, saying Evan's visit had upset him. At dinner, Evan asks Andrea about his father's efforts to recover lost memories. Andrea reveals Jason once claimed he could do something extraordinary but refuses to elaborate. After dinner, Andrea drags Evan to a psychic for fun. However, the psychic becomes alarmed, claiming Evan has no lifeline and doesn't belong in this world. Upset, Andrea explains that she had 2 stillbirths before Evan, leaving her deeply affected by the psychic's words. The following day, Evan reunites with Kaylee, who now works as a waitress. She reveals Tommy was in juvenile detention for years and that she emancipated herself at 15. When Evan brings up their past, Kaylee becomes upset, confirming George had exploited them to create disturbing films. That night, Evan learns Kaylee has taken her own life. Devastated, he attends her funeral and leaves flowers on her grave. Determined to change the past, Evan reads a journal entry about George's filming. Transported to the moment, he warns Kaylee to cover her ears and then confronts George, threatening him into submission. When Evan returns to the present, his nose bleeds as memories flood back. He discovers that altering the past has transformed his life. Kaylee is alive, they're in a loving relationship, and George's behavior was stopped early. As Evan adjusts to his new reality, he learns Andrea has remarried, and their lives are seemingly happier than before. At that moment, Evan sees Thumper walking by and tries to say hello, but Thumper doesn't recognize him and mockingly calls him a frat boy. Evan heads to class, where he notices the teacher isn't as friendly as usual. One of the frat boys who used to harass Thumper turns out to be Evan's friend and offers him answers to an upcoming test. Evan refuses and throws the answers away. That night, Evan and Kaylee are intimate, and Kaylee is impressed by his unexpected new tricks. Suddenly, the phone rings, but when Evan picks it up, the caller immediately hangs up. The next day, Evan is tasked with helping the other frat boys haze the new recruits, putting them through a series of humiliating tasks. Evan tries to act mean to fit in but struggles with the cruelty, completing the initiation ceremony too quickly. That evening, Evan prepares a romantic dinner for Kaylee, but their moment is interrupted when the frat boys inform him that his car has been destroyed. Rushing to check on it, Evan finds a dog collar at the scene. Kaylee reveals that her brother, Tommy, was recently released from jail and suspects he's responsible. They argue about Tommy's troubled past, during which Kaylee reveals that George, their father, never harmed her but instead violently took out his frustrations on Tommy. Later, Evan offers to walk Kaylee back to her sorority house, where she remarks on his strange behavior. Suddenly, they spot Evan's jacket on the ground and encounter Tommy wielding a bat. After a heated argument, Tommy attacks Evan, who retaliates by pepper spraying him. While Kaylee runs to call the police, Evan loses control in his rage, blaming Tommy for destroying Lenny's life, killing the dog, and endangering others. In a fit of fury, Evan kills Tommy with the bat. Evan is arrested and sent to jail, where he becomes the target of harassment. Fellow prisoners mock him for being privileged, steal his food, and beat him during lunch. Andrea visits him, bringing the journals he requested, but before Evan can safely return to his cell, the other inmates destroy most of them and assault him again. That night, they bribe a guard to gain access to his cell and abuse him further. The next day, Evan hears one of the inmates reading his journal aloud, humiliating him. Desperate, he uses the remaining journal pages to time travel. He convinces his devoutly religious cellmate, Carlos, to watch over him by showing him the scars on his hands, which Carlos interprets as divine marks. Returning to the moment he drew a disturbing image in class, Evan injures his hands to create the scars, solidifying Carlos's loyalty. Later, Evan confronts his harassers, pretending to comply with their demands to retrieve his journals. As they lower their guard, he stabs one of them, and Carlos intervenes to subdue the others. Evan retrieves his journals and reads them to return to the moment Tommy harmed the dog. This time, Evan gives Lenny a piece of metal to cut the bag and urges him to take action for the lives Tommy destroyed. Lenny stabs Tommy, still haunted by the mother and child's deaths. When Evan returns to the present, he finds himself in a drastically altered timeline. Lenny is in a mental institution, and Kaylee has run away from home. Thumper finds Evan unconscious with a bleeding nose and calls 911. At the hospital, a doctor runs tests and concludes that Evan's brain is overloaded, seemingly holding decades worth of memories acquired in just days. Evan later sneaks into the hospital's secure wing to find Lenny, who cryptically remarks that Evan always knew things would end this way. Determined to fix everything, Evan reads his journal to travel to the day he first met his father. Jason warns Evan against trying to play God, saying people cannot be changed without destroying who they were. Jason attacks Evan, forcing him to jump back to the present. Evan's next attempt leads him to Kaylee, who now lives in a rundown neighborhood and works as a prostitute. She's skeptical of his time travel story and suggests that if he truly wants to help, he should save the mother and child. Heartbroken, Evan returns to his dorm, reads his journal, and travels to the firework explosion. This time, he saves the mother but is caught in the blast, losing both arms. In this new reality, Evan is wheelchair-bound but finds that his friends grew up happy. Kaylee and Lenny are a couple, while Tommy has become deeply religious. However, Evan is miserable and eventually attempts suicide, only to be saved by Tommy. Evan realizes his continued presence causes pain for everyone. He uses Andrea's home movies to travel back to the womb. Believing the psychic's warning that he was never meant to exist, Evan uses the umbilical cord to end his life before birth, erasing himself from the timeline. In the final timeline, Tommy and Kaylee grow up with their mother, leading happy and successful lives. Lenny is free from trauma, and Andrea never has to endure Evan's tragic fate. The multi-generational cycle of suffering is finally